listening to Tea with Tolkien, a podcast for the Hobbit at heart. Pull up a cozy chair and join us as we chat about the works and faith of J.R.R. Tolkien and strive to carry a little piece of Middle-earth into our own daily lives. We are on week 12 of our Silmarillion read-along, and this week is quite a special one as we are going to cover chapter 19 of Beren and Lúthien. In letter 165, Tolkien calls this story the kernel of the mythology. In a sense, everything that we've read so far has been building up to this story, setting the stage and preparing the reader to understand the gravity and the incredible beauty of this chapter. If we look back to the Waldman letter, we'll remember what Tolkien wrote. The chief of the stories of the Silmarillion, and the one most fully treated, is the story of Beren and Lúthien, the Elf Maiden. Here we meet, among other things, the first example of the motive that the great policies of the world history, the wheels of the world, are often turned not by lord and governors, even gods, but by the seemingly unknown and weak, owing to the secret life of creation and the part unknowable to all wisdom but one that resides in the intrusion of the children of God into the drama. It is Beren, the outlawed mortal, who succeeds, with the help of Lúthien, a mere maiden even if an elf of royalty, where all the armies and warriors have failed. Thus he wins the hand of Lúthien, and the first marriage of mortal and immortal is achieved. Tolkien goes on to write, as such, the story is heroic fairy romance, receivable in itself with only a very general vague knowledge of the background. But it is also a fundamental link in the cycle, deprived of its full significance out of its place therein. For the capture of a Silmaril, a supreme victory, leads to disaster. The oath of the sons of Feanor becomes operative, and lust for the Silmaril brings all the kingdoms of elves to ruin. And again, this is from letter 131, which is the Waldman letter. Now, the story of Beren and Lúthien has an incredible significance within the story of the Silmarillion, of course, but it is also extremely important within Tolkien's own personal life. Tolkien and Edith, his wife, are buried together under the epitaphs of Beren and Lúthien. In letter 332, which was written in 1972, the year after Edith had passed away, Tolkien told his son Michael about the love he had for Edith and his grief at her passing. He wrote, I met Lúthien Tinuviel of my own personal romance, with her long dark hair, fair face and starry eyes, and beautiful voice. And in 1934 she was still with me and her beautiful children. But now she has gone before Beren, leaving him indeed one-handed, but he has no power to move the inexorable Mondos. And there is no Dor-Gyrth Cuinar, the land of the dead that live, in this fallen kingdom of Arda, where the servants of Morgoth are worshipped. So I hope that after just a couple of these quotes, you will understand how important this chapter is and how much it meant to Tolkien personally and the story of the Silmarillion as a whole. So this is a very big deal of a chapter, and it's very exciting. I think this is the best thing that Tolkien's ever written. I've read this chapter numerous times, but I was listening to the audiobook the other day as I was driving because I had a long car ride, and I can't overemphasize how good the audiobook of the Silmarillion is. If you struggle with reading it, like on paper, the audiobook is just incredible. A couple things are mispronounced, but overall, the narrator did an excellent job, and so I cannot stress enough how good the audiobook is. But this chapter is just incredible, and I really struggled with putting together my summary for this chapter because I really feel like I couldn't do it justice. And really, honestly, what I would recommend is just read this chapter on your own. I'm still going to summarize it just to help you put the pieces together and keep track of everything. But if you haven't been reading and you've only been listening to my summaries, please go read this chapter. It's just so good. So without further ado, let's dive into our notes. Chapter 19 of Beren and Lúthien. Tolkien writes, among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy, and under shadow of death light that endures. And of these histories, most fair still in the ears of the elves is the tale of Beren and Lúthien. Now, as this chapter begins, Barahir and his companions were pursued to the death by the servants of Morgoth, and they dwelt in the wilderness as wandering outlaws. After a time, all of these men were killed except Beren. Now Beren pursued the orcs that had killed his father, and he retrieved his father's ring. And after that, he wandered in the wilderness for about 4 years. Tolkien writes, "He did not fear death, but only captivity. And being bold and desperate, he escaped both death and bonds. And the deeds of lonely daring that he achieved were noised abroad throughout Beleriand." Now at a time he came to the land of Doriath, and he stumbled upon Lúthien as she was dancing in the grass. Upon seeing her, he was unable to speak, as if he had fallen under some kind of a spell. But at that moment, Lúthien vanished. Now, after this, he spent a lot of time just wandering and looking for her because he was just entranced by her beauty. In the spring, Beren found her again as she sang upon a hill, and the spell of silence was lifted from him, and he called to her, naming her Tinuviel. She came to him, and she loved him, but she slipped away once more, and Beren fell deep into grief. However, after a time, she returned to him and placed her hand in his, and after that, they were together, and they spent a lot of time together in secret. Now, Daeron the minstrel also loved Lúthien, and he was pretty jealous that she was hanging out with Beren, and so he told Thingol about their meetings. And as you might guess, Thingol, who wouldn't even allow men into his service at all, was pretty mad. Lúthien wouldn't tell Thingol anything about Beren until he swore not to harm or imprison him. So after he agreed to this, Lúthien led Beren before the throne of Thingol. Beren declared to Thingol that he loved Lúthien and he would like to marry her. Obviously, Thingol was very offended, and at this time he regretted his oath to Lúthien because he just wanted to kill him right then and there. Thinking himself cunning, though, Thingol gave Beren a deal. "If you bring me a Silmaril, I will give you permission to marry Lúthien." Tolkien writes, "Thus he wrought the doom of Doriath and was ensnared within the curse of Mondos." At this, Beren laughed and was like, "Oh, is that it? For little price do elven kings sell their daughters for gems and things made by craft." And so Beren is super angry, super embarrassed, and he accepted this quest and just set off at once. Everyone is pretty sad in Doriath, especially Lúthien, because she is pretty sure that Beren is going to go to his death now. Tolkien writes, "But Lúthien was silent, and from that hour she sang not again in Doriath. A brooding silence fell upon the woods, and the shadows lengthened in the kingdom of Thingol." As he left, Beren passed through Doriath unhindered, and he went to seek out Felagund. Felagund, who had been close to Beor and Barahir, welcomed Beren in and listened to his tale. As he listened to Beren speaking of Thingol's desire for a Silmaril, he understood now that it was time for him to fulfill his oath. If you'll remember, the oath that he told Galadriel about, that he should have no heir and that he would basically leave nothing behind. And he also understood that the oath of Feanor was at work. Tolkien writes, "For the Silmarils are cursed with an oath of hatred, and he that even names them in desire moves a great power from slumber, and the sons of Feanor would lay all the elf kingdoms in ruin, rather than suffer any other than themselves to win or possess a Silmaril, for the oath drives them." Now Felagund felt bound to aid Beren, so he decided that he would help him. But Celegorm and Curufin, who had been living with Felagund, were furious to hear that someone else was seeking to obtain a Silmaril, and they refused to help him at all. So Felagund left behind the crown of Nargothrond with his brother Orodreth, and he set out with Beren. He didn't have a lot of help, but they did have a few companions, and together they disguised themselves as orcs and were eventually brought before Sauron, and Sauron stripped them of their disguise, but he was unable to learn of their names or purpose, and so instead of just killing them outright, he imprisoned them in a deep pit. Every so often, a werewolf would come and devour one of the companions, but all of them remained faithful to Felagund, and eventually, unfortunately, one by one, they were slain until only Felagund and Beren remained. And at last, Felagund was also killed, so Beren was now alone. Now, Lúthien learned that Beren had been held captive by Sauron, and she decided to run away to help him. She asked Daeron to help her, and he betrayed her, because once again, why would he help her go rescue this guy that she loved when he obviously had a crush on her? It doesn't make sense for him. Thingol was pretty stressed out, realizing like how desperately Lúthien wanted to go, so he built a giant tree house in which to hold Lúthien captive, but she wove a cloak and a rope from her own hair and used that to escape. Now Huan was the great hound of Valinor, and he found Lúthien as she was escaping, and he brought her to Celegorm and Cúdafin. Lúthien asked them for help, thinking that the sons of Feanor could be trusted, but instead they betrayed her, and they decided to scheme to force Thingol to give her in marriage to Celegorm, which is gross, and I really don't like these guys. So Lúthien is being held captive, and the only people she's allowed to talk to are Celegorm and Cúdafin. However, Huan was pure of heart, and he loved Lúthien, and eventually he helped her escape. In the hour of Felagund's death, Lúthien came to Sauron's Isle. Sauron recognized the voice of Lúthien, and he was eager to capture her and bring her to Morgoth, for he knew that if he brought Lúthien to Morgoth, he would get a pretty sweet reward. Sauron sent forth various wolves to meet them. However, Huan slayed them one by one until Sauron himself had to come as a great werewolf. Huan fought against Wolf Sauron, and Huan held Wolf Sauron, and he was unable to escape without forsaking his body entirely, which he wanted to avoid because it would have been humiliating for him to have to return to Morgoth as a ghosty figure, and Sauron would have just been devastated and super embarrassed. So Lúthien demanded that Sauron yield the mastery of his tower and his isle, and he agreed to this, and after that he shapeshifted into a vampire and fled away. So in this chapter we have werewolves and vampires, and I just think that's funny, and this is just a way better story than Twilight, I'm sorry. After that, Lúthien found Beren, and together they buried Felagund. Tolkien writes, "They buried the body of Felagund upon the hilltop of his own isle, and it was clean again. And the green grave of Finrod, Finarfin's son, fairest of all the princes of the elves, remained inviolate, until the land was changed and broken, and foundered under destroying seas. But Finrod walks with Finarfin his father beneath the trees in Eldamar." After this, Beren resolved to take Lúthien back to Doriath and finish his quest, but she was unwilling to be parted from him. Now Huan returned to Celegorm, and there was tumult in Nargothrond as the people grieved the loss of Felagund. But they also realized something kind of fishy was up. Tolkien writes, "They lamented bitterly the fall of Felagund their king, saying that a maiden had dared that which the sons of Feanor had not dared to do. But many perceived that it was treachery rather than fear that had guided Celegorm and Cúdafin." After this, Celegorm and Cúdafin left Nargothrond. However, Celebrimbor, the son of Cúdafin, remained. In the forest of Brethil, Beren and Lúthien were walking, and Celegorm and Cúdafin happened upon them. They were angry, super mad, and so they tried to kill Beren and Lúthien, going so far as to shoot Beren in the breast with an arrow. However, Lúthien used her power to heal him, and after that, once again, Beren tried to leave Lúthien behind. However, this time, Huan and Lúthien pursued him, and at this point, Beren finally understood that he could not dissuade Lúthien. Tolkien writes, "Then Beren perceived that Lúthien could not be divided from the doom that lay upon them both, and he sought no longer to dissuade her." Beren and Lúthien disguised themselves in the raiment of two of Sauron's servants, putting on a wolf skin and a giant bat outfit. They disguised themselves as it. And after this, they came to the gate of Angband. Carcharoth, Morgoth's hound, was set before the doors of Angband. However, Lúthien commanded him to sleep, and it worked, and they just continued on through. Tolkien writes, "Then Beren and Lúthien went through the gate and down the labyrinthine stairs, and together wrought the greatest deed that has been dared by elves or men. Together they came before the throne of Morgoth, but Beren, who was still disguised as a wolf, just laid down before the throne, real low-key. But Lúthien was stripped of her disguise. However, she was not daunted." Tolkien writes, "She was not daunted by his eyes, and she named her own name and offered her service to sing before him after the manner of a minstrel. Then Morgoth, looking upon her beauty, conceived in his thought an evil lust, and a design more dark than any that had yet come into his heart since he fled from Valinor. Thus he was beguiled by his own malice, for he watched, leaving her free for a while, taking secret pleasure in his thought. So gross. Morgoth is just so gross. Really don't like that guy. Lúthien's song lulled everyone in Morgoth's court to sleep, and when she cast her cloak before his eyes, Morgoth also fell asleep, and he just fell to the ground, and the iron crown rolled off of his head. Beren then took out his little knife, and he cut one of the Silmarils from the crown. It was super easy. However, after that, he got a little bit overly confident, and he thought, okay, I'm not just going to bring one Silmaril to Thingol, I'm going to bring him two. But it was not his fate that he should be able to free two Silmarils. And so the knife snapped, and a shard of the knife smote the cheek of Morgoth, and he kind of stirred a little bit. However, he didn't wake up, and after this, they fled because they were freaked out. Now, Carcharoth had awoken, and he met them at the gate, and he bit Beren's hand off as it held the Silmaril. So Beren only has one hand now, and his entire hand with the Silmaril is now inside this crazy wolf's belly. The Silmaril burned the hound from inside, and he went forth in rage and madness, just killing anything that crossed his path. Like, he's just gone insane from, like, this holy jewel that's burning him so terribly. After this, the great eagles came, and they carried Beren and Lúthien away, just as the forces of Morgoth were awakening. So, how convenient that once again the eagles are helping out. You can tell that Tolkien loves when the eagles help out. They're just helping out all the time. Now, after Beren was healed, he and Lúthien wandered around, and they lived in contentment in the wild for a while. However, eventually, Beren was like, I gotta do what's right, so they returned to Doriath. Lúthien led Beren before the throne of Thingol. Tolkien writes, but Beren knelt before him and said, I return according to my word. I am come now to claim my own. And Thingol answered, what of your quest and of your vow? But Beren said, it is fulfilled. Even now, a Silmaril is in my hand. And after this, Beren shows, he opens his left hand, and then he raises up his right arm, and you see that his hand is gone. And after this, Thingol's mood was softened because I think he just, I don't know. I mean, it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. It's probably the funniest part in the Silmarillion, in my opinion. But after this, Beren and Lúthien told Thingol about their journey and everything that happened, and Thingol finally agreed to allow them to marry. However, Thingol still didn't have the Silmaril, and so his quest wasn't, like, completely ended. And they realized that they had to go kill this crazy wild hound that was, like, roaming the countryside and killing everybody. And so they prepared to hunt the hound. On their hunt, Huan slew Carcharoth. However, Huan also died in doing this, and Beren was mortally wounded while protecting Thingol. As Beren died, Lúthien bade him to await her beyond the western sea, and his spirit tarried in the halls of Mandos. After this, Lúthien's spirit also faded. Tolkien writes, but the spirit of Lúthien fell down into darkness, and at the last it fled, and her body lay like a flower that is suddenly cut off and lies for a while unwithered on the grass. Lúthien came to the halls of Mandos, and she sang before his throne, and he was moved to pity, which has never happened before and will never happen again. Mandos offered Lúthien a choice. She could go to Valinor and dwell in the Blessed Realm free from all grief forever, or she could return to Middle-earth, taking Beren with her, and become immortal. And Lúthien chose mortality. Tolkien writes, this doom she chose, forsaking the Blessed Realm and putting aside all claim to kinship with those that dwelt there, that thus whatever grief might lie in wait, the fates of Beren and Lúthien might be joined, and their paths led together beyond the confines of the world. So it was that alone of the Adaliae she has indeed died, and left the world long ago. Yet in her choice the two kindreds have been joined, and she is the forerunner of many in whom the Eldar see yet, though all the world is changed, the likeness of Lúthien the beloved, whom they have lost. Together they returned to Middle-earth and dwelt in Tol Galen until their death, and they had a son named Dior, who was Thingol's heir. Tolkien writes, no mortal man spoke ever again with Beren, son of Barahir, and none saw Beren or Lúthien leave the world, or marked where at last their bodies lay. So, a lot happens in this chapter, and actually the conclusion of their story, the last couple of lines, are from the next chapter, but I thought since it really makes a lot more sense with this chapter that we'd cover it here, because it wouldn't really make sense to just end it where the chapter ends, if that makes sense. So next week, we are going to be discussing chapter 20. I can't believe how far we've gotten already. It seems like just yesterday we were reading the Waldman letter. So thank you so much for listening to yet another book club episode. I'm so happy that you're here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Holy Week and a beautiful Easter. I will be back next week, and I'll talk to you later.